That was notation number 5. When he was 20 years old, Boulez wrote 12 little pieces for piano called notation. Each piece was only 12 bars long and they all used the same 12-note row. Many years later, he took a few of those pieces, probably he intended to do all of them, but until now he took some of these pieces and turned them into orchestral versions. But they are a lot more than just orchestrated versions of the piano pieces. Boulez said that the orchestra had much bigger scale, so the pieces had to be bigger in scale too. So even if he uses some of the same material, they are nothing like the piano version. They are very different, and nothing will show that better than listening to the notation number 2, the piano version, and then hearing the orchestral version. It's almost unrecognizable, even if some of the gestures are still there. George Benjamin said that notation probably are the best orchestral pieces written after the Second World War. But enough about notation now. As you know, unfortunately, Pierre Boulez died a few days ago. Many people spoke very nicely about him, and a lot of them knew him much better than I did, of course. I only had the chance to meet him once when he came to college, and that was one of the most impressive days for me. I will always remember how he came and gave a lecture in the recital hall, and the amazing thing is that probably the administration of college arranged that lecture to be in the recital hall, assuming that the concert hall might not be full of people, and it may look a bit bad, really, if Boulez lectures in an empty hall. So they arranged it in recital hall, but contrary to their expectations, the recital hall was absolutely full. In fact, there were people in the hallway, people standing on the stairs down, with no chance of really hearing him. But such was the interest. It was amazing. And even people that were really skeptical about Boulez and his ideas were there just to hear what he had to say. Such was the interest that this man raised. And what was even more fascinating, I thought, was that a lot of those who came, let's say, determined not to like what he had to say, were practically converted to his ideas by the end of the lecture. And I think that was his power. When he got older, he was no longer the rebellious, angry young man of the 1940s, let's say. But he had such a strong personality, charm, and above all, I think, he had such great clarity of thinking and intelligence that he could convince you just by the power of his arguments. Every question that he was asked, he would answer so clearly and so directly and so well argumented, again, that you had no option really but agree with his views by the end, even though you probably had an opposite idea, opposite view to start with. And it was really quite amazing to see a lot of my more skeptical friends go down to the library to try to listen to his music after the lecture, just because they were so impressed with him. And the orchestras and various ensembles at college that they played his music, and I think it was the first, no, it was not the first time. Before that I knew Le Marteau sans Maître. I did a presentation myself on it, but I think it was the first day when I really heard a lot of Boulez music, and suddenly I became more interested in him, let's say, more genuinely interested. But I was still very ignorant at the time, and I'm trying not to be anymore, to my benefit, I think. As I said, I don't want to speak too much about Boulez himself, because so much has been said already, and I think what is needed, from my point of view, more, is for us to focus a lot more on his music, because at the end of the day, I'm sure that is what he would have liked. And not to accuse anyone, but I just think just too much is being said about what he achieved in, I mean, you can't say that it's being said too much, but in balance, it's been said a lot about his conducting the greatness of his achievements of founding ERCAM and Lucerne Festival Academy and Paris Philharmonie, which probably wouldn't exist without him. You know, every one of these things on its own would be incredible achievement for a musician, but he achieved them all. And of course, he was a great composer, and of course, he was a great conductor. But again, I would like to focus more on his music. Unfortunately, I think even musicians, many musicians, have the impression, wrongly in my opinion, that his music is difficult and is too intellectual and maybe not emotional enough and maybe not moving enough. I think this is completely wrong, and my purpose in this video is to try to convince anyone who will watch it of the opposite. I think a lot of his music is truly beautiful and moving and like nothing else, and it has a lot of sensuality, and some of it has a lot of even eroticism and incredible variety of colors and contrast and so on. The first piece that I'm going to focus on is Le Visage Nuptial, but just before that I'd like to speak a bit about how, in my opinion, you should listen to this music. Obviously, this music is so different from the music of a century before, because when Boulez was young, he was part of that rebellious avant-garde group who really pushed music in a new direction. And that current, of course, was surrealism, the new surrealism, total surrealism, and that pretty much abolished every one of the old rules, which means that this music was so completely different from anything else before that you simply can't listen to it with the same ears as before. You have to learn to listen to it differently, and that will reach you if you learn how to listen to this music differently. Because those rules no longer apply. For example, you know, normal tonal relations or functional harmony, or even normal, let's say, a regular meter or pulse or anything. You know, if all these parameters of music were serialized, it meant that there were no patterns really. I mean, there were patterns because there were the rows, of course, but a row really what does is that it's trying to eliminate pretty much every pattern. So every old way of listening to this is wrong, really. But then what happens is that a lot of people try to figure out how, let's say, to understand this music, and I think they fall into a trap. They start to imagine that the only way to understand or to enjoy this music is by knowing how it is made, by knowing what is inside, what the rules are, how the notes are there, because of course, after all, serialism has this reputation that everything is predetermined and organized and so on. And that is somehow true, but at the same time is not true. Because pretty much every serialist composer, every good serialist composer, starting with Schoenberg, did their most to avoid having music that can easily be identified as organized in rows and so on. Schoenberg actually said, my pieces are 12-note compositions, not 12-note compositions. You know, I'm going to read another couple of quotes from both from Schoenberg and from Boulez, just to make the point of this. And unfortunately I have to lean down a little to read the quotes. Schoenberg said, "I cannot often enough warn against the overrating of analysis, since it invariably leads to what I have always fought against, the knowledge of how something is made. Whereas I have always tried to promote the knowledge of what something is." Boulez, later, a few years before he wrote the famous Le Marteau sans Maître, said, "The more complex the formal means are, the less they are perceived intellectually by the listener." Now what I say is that doesn't mean, really, that you should not investigate. But the danger with serialist and other complex music is that you can become so overwhelmed with the need for investigation, so perplexed at how the music is made, that you forget to listen to it, to really listen to it, and to you know, let yourself dream and let your imagination flow with it. One more thing that Boulez said, again around the period of the Le Marteau sans Maître, said, "We need not busy ourselves about the mechanism that leads to the work, but rather with the work itself, which, once composed, casts into the night all the preliminary procedures." So we need to concentrate really on the sound and on the colors and on what we hear, not necessarily what we know about it. Of course, it's even more fascinating if sometimes we can tell how the music is made, but it's not really the purpose of it. The purpose of this music is to fascinate you and to inspire you and to make you travel somewhere else in a world where you haven't been. Okay, so what do we need to listen for in this music? Well, I think we need to listen, of course, for colors, for shapes. Because what happens is that in some way, serialism, when it appeared, it almost forces us, let's say the listeners, to go back to times ancestral somehow, before tonality, before regular meter, before melody. And it forces you to really react to colors, different sounds, to the tones, by colors, of course, combination of instruments and registers and so on. So you have to let yourself perceive that, you know, because there is huge variety in this music, in that sense. But then there's another thing that you have to listen for, which is different planes with different sorts of activity in them. Let's imagine that there's some busy, quick shimmering music somewhere, maybe somewhere quite high, you know, percussion, let's say like glockenspiels and wind chimes and who knows, quite high, and maybe some celesta, and that's quite quick and shimmering, and at the same time you have some sustaining strings with some trills in the background, softer. So this is sparkling music on top, and this soft background of strings in more like middle register further in the background, and maybe let's say a bass clarinet that has some incisive accents, or the bottom slightly irregular, boom, who knows, I don't know. And all this happens at the same time. And of course, many things happen in previous music as well at the same time, but not in the same way that it happens in serialist music. The textures are now different, you know, so listen for these contrasts and planes and activities and that sort of stuff. After all, Harrison Birtwistle said, who himself is not a serialist composer, he said, Cubism changed the way we look at the world, and serialism changed the way we listen to it. I think it's a great little thing he said here, because I really think it's true that serialism changed the way we listen to the world, as long as we are aware of it. Although I think personally that I would replace cubism with abstract art, because analytic cubism is still figurative. So in my view that still means tonal if you transfer it to music. Okay, back to how we listen to this music. In later music that Boulez wrote, let's say after the 1980s, he uses another little technique, which is he insists on certain sounds, on a pitch. It's very clear, for example, the end of Répond, a piece which I'm going to play for you at the end, when he keeps insisting on this B, but that's just one example. And then around these sounds that he insists, there are other sounds that gravitate. Someone said in a book, I don't have time now, I'm afraid to find the quote, but if anyone is interested, I'll provide it for you. Said these sounds are like moons around the planet. So then he called them polar sounds, these sounds that are insistent, and then the ones that gravitate. So the planet, the polar sounds, and the moons that gravitate around the planet. What other ways to listen to serialist music? There is also, as Boulez himself describes it, there are basic things. One is, a lot of his music is music of high energy, especially the music of Boulez, or music of great calm, and sometimes, or frequently, the music of high energy is music of regular pulse, and the music of great calm is music of more irregular pulse. Another aspect to look for, I guess, when you listen to this music. But at the end of the day, you just need to let yourself visit worlds that you haven't visited before. I said a few times, you need to allow yourself to imagine unimaginable worlds and to travel to untraveled before destinations. You have to be totally open-minded, and your ears have to guide you in this music. Okay. Now I'm going to play for you an extract from Le Visage Nuptial. Le Visage Nuptial is a fantastic piece of music. It's beautiful, truly beautiful music by Boulez, written in the 1940s. I think it was 1946 or something, 1946-47, I can't remember exactly, but revised a few times. I think even as late as 2014 he revised it. And initially when he wrote this piece, it was after he heard the piece by his teacher, Messiaen. I can't quite remember the exact title, or something like Trois petites liturgies de la présence divine, or something like that, I think it's called, the piece of Messiaen. And it's clearly influenced by Messiaen, but just as clearly is influenced by Debussy, and it's very French. And the Debussy piece that I think is very connected to this is the Nocturnes for orchestra with the female choir, the Sirens. And because of the theme, because this piece is the piece by Boulez, Le Visage Nuptial, is written on a poem by René Char, is related to Les Noces of Stravinsky, so you can find Stravinsky in this piece as well. I think Boulez almost, probably consciously, almost quotes Stravinsky from Les Noces a few times. But listen to it, and you'll see that this is music of such sensuality and voluptuous music, languorous music, color, French. It's just truly beautiful. Listen to this little extract, and hopefully that will make you curious to hear the whole piece, and I'll see you afterwards. I was driving home one evening and I turned on the radio, and there was this music that I found absolutely fascinating. It was relentless and it had huge energy, and it's just, I haven't heard anything like that before. I hadn't heard. And I figured out it was something by Boulez, but I didn't know what. So when I arrived home, I started to investigate. I found out it was a piece called Sur Incise that Boulez wrote for 3 pianos, 3 harps and 3 percussionists. He took material from an earlier piece he wrote for a piano competition in 1994 in Milan, for which the musical director and the president of the jury was Luciano Berio, his friend. So he wrote this little piece for piano called Incise, and later he took material from that and expanded it and transformed it in new ways and turned it into a new piece called Sur Incise, which is over half an hour long. And after he finished that, he went back to the original piano piece and expanded that too. But Boulez did a lot of that after the 1970s. Every work was a sort of a work in progress, and he would keep going back to it and so on. I'll explain a bit more before I present to you Exposant Fix. But coming back to Sur Incise, and as I mentioned before, this is music of immense energy, and it sounds so euphoric, and the way in which the pianos complement each other with the harps and the percussionists is quite amazing, because he took actually, as I said, material from the original piano piece, but he presents it now in new ways. He gives it new meaning, new dimension, new resonance. And there's this section that starts about 4 minutes in. I think it's a presto or prestissimo section. I'm not quite sure because I don't have the music for this piece. I have music for other pieces by Boulez, but not this one. And this section, really frenetic, as I said, it just feels like it's never ending. It keeps going. I remember when I heard it for the first time, I thought, oh my god, when is it going to stop? And it just kept going and going and going. And I felt like I was on drugs or something, not that I know what that is. But it also gives me this surreal image that it reminds me of Baron Münchhausen, if you say that in English, and his crazy journeys. So for some reason I imagine myself being on one of these journeys. My soul has, I don't know, total imponderability and is traveling somewhere to this surreal moon of Baron Münchhausen, and on this moon there are mountains of sugar and gigantic mice run around, and just as big insects dance ballet, or I don't know what. You don't need to imagine that, of course, but let your mind go where your ears, let your mind go where the ears guide you, basically. That's what I mean. I'll see you afterwards, so listen to this short excerpt from Sur Incise. In 1974-1975, Boulez wrote a piece called Rituel in memoriam Bruno Maderna. As the title suggests, this was written after the death of Boulez's friend and colleague, the composer and conductor Bruno Maderna. Bruno Maderna was very much liked by the other friends of their circle, the other composers, Berriot, Boulez. Ligeti said in an interview, everybody liked Maderna. And he died too soon. Boulez, in response, wrote this piece, which is for 8 groups, 8 different ensembles spread around the hall. I guess in a sort of a homage to Maderna, who liked and wrote himself this sort of spatial music. This piece by Boulez is based on the idea of antiphony, of call and response between the different groups. So each one of these groups contains different instruments, so has different colors, and all of them, except the brass group, each one of these groups is conducted by a percussionist. So there's lots of like gongs and percussion instruments throughout. And there's a conductor who directs the whole ensemble and has sometimes the choice to put 2 groups together so they form homophony when they play pretty much the same thing. Or he can choose to start them at slightly different times, and then it's almost the same thing played at different times, so it's heterophony, which is typical, as it happens, well, quite frequently encountered in folk music of some countries, including my country, Romania. Now, coming back to the piece, William Glock, who was at the time the music director of the BBC where Boulez worked, because Boulez then was the principal conductor of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, so William Glock said about the piece, "This is a majestic processional in memory of Bruno Maderna." Now, one thing to listen for is also the moments of rest, moments when only the gongs are going or some percussion. So after some collective despair and mourning, then these moments of emptiness and desolation. And when you hear this piece and you see how the groups interact with each other, sometimes come together, sometimes they are apart, sometimes one calls, sometimes another answers, it's really quite impressive, because it suggests, in my mind, a funeral cortege that works, and small different groups forming, and they all mourn in their own ways, and sometimes they come together, and sometimes it's more private. So listen for all these differences, and of course it would be quite impressive to hear it in a hall, be surrounded by all these groups playing. I'm going to also read to you what Boulez said about this piece. In the preface, he wrote, "Perpetual alternation, a sort of verse and response for an imaginary ceremony, a ceremony of remembrance, whence these numerous returns to the same formulae while changing profile and perspective. Ceremony of extinction, the ritual of disappearance and survival. In this way are images imprinted on the musical memory, present, absent, imprinted on uncertainty." You will hear that this piece is quite different from pretty much everything else that I'm going to select for this video. And that reminds me that I should say that Boulez evolved very much through his career as a composer, as you will realize even from this selection of pieces that I prepared. For example, I was mentioning earlier serialism, and of course he was very, very important in the serialist movement. He was one of its leaders. And some of the pieces that he wrote, like Le Marteau sans Maître, or the Second Piano Sonata, or Structure, are some of the most important pieces in this style. But even in these pieces, he was not absolutely strict and dogmatic about his serialism, despite what image people may have about him. He liked to have this discipline and rigor because he liked to break away from it. He liked to break the rules. He said once that he makes the rules so that he can break them. So even a piece as famously serialist as Le Marteau sans Maître apparently according to someone who analyzed it, is only about 80% serialist. And later in his career as a composer, although he still uses rows, 12-note rows and serialism, Boulez can't anymore be described really as a serialist composer, because he experiments with electronic music, with different sounds and things he maybe heard at others. He tries chance music and so on, so he evolves and moves in different directions as well. And you'll notice in this piece that he sounds different from, as I said before, from everything else. Listen to it and see what you think. In 1971, Boulez wrote a short two-page piece, which was aleatoric. He called it Explosant Fix, and it was written as a memorial to Stravinsky. But from that time, 1971, until 1993, when the last incarnation of that piece appeared, there were numerous versions. So I think this is the point where I can expand a bit on the way Boulez kept going back to material that he worked on previously. This piece had so many different versions. Boulez had so many attempts at it. So he would work on the material for combination, he would seem, let's say, satisfied with it, and then no, another one. So I'm going to go a bit through the list of different versions that this piece had. At first, as I said, this was an aleatoric work with no specified instrumentation. Then Boulez expanded that and turned it into a work for solo flute, accompanied by clarinet, trumpet, harp, vibraphone, violin, viola, cello, and electronics. Then there was a version for a trio of violin, clarinet, and trumpet. Then there was a septet version. Then there was a version for vibraphone and electronics. Then there was an octet, so all the same piece, different versions. By 1993, Boulez wrote a new last version for solo MIDI flute with live electronics, 2 shadow flutes, and a chamber orchestra. Who knows, maybe if he had lived a few more decades, he would still go back and come up with other versions. I'm going to read a quote from Boulez on how he used to go back and rework on old material, because it's so typical for what he wrote in the last part of his life. So, Boulez said, "My recent music is much like a family tree. One tree spawns many other trees and so on. The Rive 1 is from Repon, so all these are different pieces. Mostly music I left out, so I derived this from the piece, hence the name. The Rive 2 is based off studies I did for Repon. The Rive 3 is also like that. Repon itself was my response to Poésie pour pouvoir, which I had written over 20 years earlier. As long as material from another piece is not used fully, I like to expand on it until it is exhausted. This is why they are all works in progress." So, going back to Explosion Fixe, which is a really essential piece again, and it makes me think when I hear parts of it, it makes me think again of Le Visage Nuptial, the first piece I played, that Boulez wrote many years before. It's again very French, very sensual. This title, Explosion Fixe, in some way it describes even his philosophy, Boulez's philosophy as a composer. Exploding, fixe. Fixe is, let's say, the discipline and the rigor that he always tried to have in his music. But exploding is him looking for freedom, exploding from the fixed discipline. But the title itself really comes from a book by André Breton, from a line in that book called L'amour fou. So that particular line in English is, "Convulsive beauty will be erotic veiled, exploding fixed, magical circumstantial, or it will not be at all." It's 2 in the morning, so I have to confess I'm finding it a little difficult to concentrate and keep my mind clear. But when I think about the next piece, I get all excited again, because the next piece that I want to play, three short little extracts, and with this I'll conclude the video, is a repon. A repon is a really amazing piece of music. Now, every piece that I selected for you tonight is a piece that I think is great. But even within these, repon, maybe Le Visage Nuptial, Silences, I don't know, Ritual. Now I'm going to mention all of them. I was going to say it's special, but at the end of the day they are all special. But this one is great because there's nothing like it again. So much that Boulez did is unlike anything else. So Repon is a piece written for a chamber orchestra, 6 soloists. The soloists are 2 pianists, a harp, and 3 percussion instruments, one playing on the cymbalom. And in addition to that, there's a huge arsenal of live electronics. I have to explain a little about the live electronics. Because you see, in the previous piece, Exposant Fix, one of the reasons for which Boulez reworked that so many times is that if you remember, a few of those versions had electronics in them, and he was not really satisfied with the technology at the time, with the way in which musicians had to interact with the fixed tape. So he tried another version, and so on. In Repon, by the time he wrote Repon, which was 1983, 1984, the technology had moved on a little, and now he uses what I called live electronics, which means that the sound is manipulated in real time and not really on tape. Although I think even in this piece there is some tape. I think he used to call it like sound wallpaper or something, the tape electronic music. But the majority of the electronics really are live, manipulated live. So basically a group of instrumentists will be captured by the microphones and then moved around the hall on a variety of speakers, and their sounds will be distorted and their rhythmical patterns will be changed in ways you can't even imagine, and so on. But unfortunately that makes incredible demands on resources. I'm going to read to you really what this piece needs for live performance. So, the chamber ensemble sits on a platform in the center of the auditorium, surrounded by the audience. The 6 soloists are at the fringes of the performing space, and they are meant to be at equal distance from each other. The technological arsenal required is scary. It needs 38 loudspeakers, 8 stereo equalizers, 24 audio lines linking the soloists with mixers, and a whole, arsenal, as I said, of other stuff. Computer synthesizers, MIDI interfaces, microphone splitters, and many of them need to be obtained from IRCAM. Actually, this was the first and maybe most important piece that Boulez created at IRCAM, the Institute of Research Music and Acoustics. Okay, what else is to say about this? Boulez, I keep looking at the notes just so I don't forget something essential. One thing Boulez said about this piece is he likened it, or the musical effect, to someone viewing an exhibit at Guggenheim Museum. So he says, as visitors ascend or descend its spiraled interior, they can see the art in front of them as well as the work they have just viewed and that which is already further away. Yeah. Now, one thing to really listen for in Repon is the cymbalom, which is an instrument which I think is fascinating. Of course, it appears a lot in my folk music, in Romanian music, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. The lower register is so different from the upper register. Low register sometimes can sound quite sinister. The upper register is so refined sometimes, but the player in this piece in Repon has to be quite a virtuoso of the instrument. So try to see how that combines with the rest of the instruments, because the truth is that the way in which Boulez uses the cymbalum is nothing like it is used in Hungarian or Romanian music, for example. Now the first section, the first little fragment that I'm going to play to you from this piece is a bit of section 2. And if you hear this music, the sparkles and everything makes me think of streams of molten gold. I don't know if that's what will come to your mind when you hear it, but I think it's just amazing sound world. I mentioned before the extreme demands that this piece makes for performance in terms of staging for musicians, the many requirements, technological requirements for the electronics and so on. That unfortunately makes it very difficult for it to be performed, so there haven't been too many performances of it. But what I know is that every performance was a memorable experience for those in the hall. People that I know were there, testimonials I read, all suggest that it's an unforgettable occasion, and that there's nothing like it really. So hopefully one day I'll get to be in the hall for a performance of Repon. Let's see. Also, I think there's only one recording, and even though it's a very, very impressive recording, it must be really difficult to capture what it's like to be in the hall surrounded by all the musicians and technology, the speakers, 30 speakers, imagine. So when I listen to it, I'm trying to bring myself there in the hall, to recreate it in my mind, what it would be like, and to try to experience that, even though I'm not there. So I suggest you try to imagine that as well, you know, what it's like to be in the center of this, and then to have all this come from all over, all the sounds. Now, what I was going to say, next little extract is from section 4, and it's a different sort of beat here. Listen for these trills in the piano. It's a music that is somehow suspended in a mood. It suggests to me, I don't know why, but suggests nostalgia. It makes me think of memory. Like, it makes me think of something from far away. Like watching, for example, an old home movie. You know, you are there but you're not there. You see it from a distance, but this feels very nostalgic and sad somehow. I don't know if you get the same impression when you hear it, but it's quite amazing. So I hope you enjoy it. Pierre Boulez was a masterful conductor, was a great man of culture, very influential. He said, politics must serve art and not the reverse. But above all, he was an extremely daring, original, imaginative composer. I heard him say in an interview, "I am in my music, in all of it." I hope with these short extracts from some of my favorite pieces that he wrote, I hope I managed to inspire you a little to explore more of his music, and I hope I managed to convince you that it is music of great variety and beauty and contrast and sensuality, and is music worth the effort to learn it and discover it. I'm going to end this with a final short passage from Répond. This is the very end, the coda. Someone compared it with the faint light of stars before sunrise. Listen to the arpeggios that end on a B. Piano, cymbalom, piano, further apart until they die away. It seems particularly relevant in context. His death a few days ago is a great loss to music. There hasn't been anyone in the last half century like Boulez. If you look at all his achievements as a whole, one could say there has never been anybody quite like Boulez, ever. So I'm going to leave you with this music, and all that remains to be said is rest in peace, Pierre Boulez.